Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to the cobblestone streets, smoky taverns, and bustling and often very smelly towns of the Middle Ages, to explore a truly fascinating and often stomach-churning topic: boring history for sleep, what it was like to have a terrible medieval job, and more. Forget the knights in shining armor and the elegant ladies in castles for a moment. We're going to pull back the curtain on the unsung and probably unwashed heroes who kept medieval society running. Imagine yourself waking up, not to the gentle hum of your modern alarm, but to the distinct smell of, well, we'll get to that. Your day is about to begin, and it's probably going to involve something truly awful. Sounds like a terrible life. Right. Having a terrible medieval job was indeed a common reality. But here's the cheeky reality check if you were one of these workers. You probably won't survive this. At least, not without constantly chapped hands, a perpetual smell that never quite washes off, or wishing you had just a few more hours of sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey into the less than glamorous side of medieval employment begins with a job that truly earns its terrible moniker: a role steeped in the darkest, most pungent depths of urban life: gong farmer waste management. Foul odors. Forget modern plumbing and discreet waste disposal. In the medieval world, someone had to manually deal with the accumulated filth of cities, and that someone was often you, a gong farmer, laboring in the most disgusting conditions imaginable. Imagine the suffocating stench rising from the overflowing cesspit, so thick it almost tastes like rotten eggs and decay. This was the omnipresent reality of being a gong farmer. Your job was, quite simply, to remove human waste and other refuse from the privies, outhouses, and cesspits of medieval towns and castles. This wasn't a job you chose for glory or riches. It was a desperate, backbreaking, and utterly disgusting necessity in a world without proper sanitation. You were not just a worker, you were the designated handler of the unspeakable, wading through the very worst of urban living. It's like being a plumber today, but your tools are a shovel and a bucket, and you're working directly in the sewer. Your work revolved around waste management, specifically the collection and removal of night soil human excrement. Cesspits, often located beneath houses or in backyards, would fill up over time, and it was your unenviable task to empty them. This typically happened under the cover of darkness. To minimize the offense to public sensibilities and noses, imagine descending into a deep, narrow pit, perhaps with only a flickering lantern, the air so foul it burns your throat and eyes, scooping thick, viscous waste into buckets, which then had to be hauled up and transported. The smell would cling to you, permeating your clothes, your skin, and your very soul. The foul odors were not just an unpleasant side effect, they were a constant, pervasive assault on your senses. This wasn't merely the smell of sewage, it was a complex miasma of human waste, rotting food, animal refuse, and general urban decay, festering in the dark. Imagine going home, if you even had a home that wasn't near your work, and still smelling it, unable to escape the lingering stench, realizing that this was your life's permanent perfume. It's enough to make you wish for a simple desk job, or perhaps just a very strong clothesline and a fresh breeze. Due to the extreme nature of the work, gong farmers often worked at night and lived in isolated areas, shunned by society. Despite their vital role in public health, however rudimentary, they were seen as unclean and undesirable. It was a job that promised little social standing, but often a higher wage due to its inherent unpleasantness and the risk of disease. This truly awful role of a gong farmer highlights the rudimentary and often shocking state of medieval sanitation, where vital public services were performed by those pushed to the absolute margins of society. Enduring unimaginable conditions? One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this role is the historical records from medieval English towns, such as London, which contain ordinances and payments specifically for gong farmers or rakers, cleaners of streets and ditches, detailing their duties and the times they were permitted to work. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval gong farmers would reportedly wear crude, improvised face coverings made of thick cloth soaked in vinegar or even aromatic herbs, not for full protection, but as a desperate attempt to mask or mitigate the overwhelming stench while working in the pits. Imagine trying to breathe through a vinegar-soaked rag. It certainly highlights the extreme lengths they went to cope with the foul conditions. Historians still argue whether the high wages sometimes paid to gong farmers primarily indicate a true societal recognition of their vital, albeit disgusting, service, or if it was simply a bare minimum incentive to attract anyone desperate enough to take on such a profoundly undesirable and dangerous occupation. Did it show respect, or just desperation regardless? Your medieval life could see you as a gong farmer, immersed in constant waste management and enduring unimaginable foul odors. So, your medieval life could see you as a gong farmer, immersed in constant waste management and enduring unimaginable foul odors, but for a different kind of terrible medieval job, one that commanded a grim sort of public fascination and a chilling aura. You might find yourself in the role of an executioner brutal justice. Social pariah. Forget the smells of the cesspit. Here, the stench was of fear and blood, and your hands, though clean of waste, were stained with the very lives of others. Imagine the deafening roar of the crowd, the chilling silence before the final swing, and the visceral shudder that rippled through the onlookers. This was the omnipresent reality of being an executioner. Your job was to carry out the sentences of the law, whether it was hanging, beheading, drawing and quartering, or breaking on the wheel. You were the final arbiter of medieval brutal justice. The grim hand of the state, ensuring that punishment was not just inflicted, but seen to be inflicted, often as a public spectacle. You were not just a worker, you were a necessary, yet deeply reviled, instrument of death. It's like being a surgeon today, but your tools are an axe and a rope, and your patients are never going to get better. Your duties were often gruesome, requiring a chilling blend of strength, precision, and an utter detachment from the human suffering before you. Imagine leading a condemned prisoner to the gallows, their pleas echoing in your ears, or carefully positioning the axe for a clean beheading. Knowing that a botched job would lead to public outcry and perhaps even violence directed at you. The methods were designed to be terrifying deterrents, and you were the one who had to perform them. Witnessing every agonizing detail up close, it's enough to make you wish for a simple, quiet life as a baker, or perhaps just a very strong stomach. Despite your essential role in maintaining law and order, you were typically a social pariah. Your profession was deemed unclean due to its association with death and violence. You and your family would often live on the outskirts of town, shunned by the general populace. No one wanted to marry into an executioner's family, and shops might refuse to serve you. Imagine walking through the market, feeling the eyes of everyone on you, not with respect or admiration, but with a mixture of fear, disgust, and morbid curiosity, knowing you were forever tainted by your grim work. This wasn't just a job, it was a societal condemnation. However, the executioner often held a unique, albeit unofficial, position. They sometimes served as torturers, jailers, or even public health officers, disposing of animal carcasses, further cementing their association with the unpleasant necessities of medieval life. This incredibly grim role of an executioner highlights the harsh realities of medieval justice, where public display and extreme punishment were central. and the individuals tasked with enforcing it were simultaneously essential and utterly ostracized. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this role is the historical records of medieval towns and castles, detailing payments made to executioners for specific executions and the maintenance of instruments of punishment, confirming their official, if reviled, position within the legal system. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval executioners, despite being pariahs, would reportedly sell small vials of the blood of the condemned or pieces of the rope used in hangings to superstitious onlookers, who believed these items possessed magical or medicinal properties. Turning their grim work into a macabre side hustle? Imagine selling pieces of your workplace equipment as souvenirs. It certainly highlights the strange intersection of fear and superstition in medieval society. Historians still argue whether the public role of the executioner primarily served as an effective deterrent against crime, maintaining social order through fear, or if it instead desensitized the populace to violence and contributed to a cycle of brutality. Revealing the dark underbelly of medieval legal systems, did it enforce order, or just highlight cruelty regardless? Your medieval life could place you as an executioner, dispensing brutal justice and enduring life as a social pariah. So, your medieval life could place you as an executioner, dispensing brutal justice and enduring life as a social pariah, but for a job that didn't involve human suffering directly. At least but certainly involved a lot of squirming. You might have found yourself as a leech collector's slimy business. Disease risk. Forget the clanging of swords or the cries of the condemned. Here. The sound was the quiet squelch of mud and the slither of small, bloodthirsty creatures, all for the sake of medieval medicine. Imagine wading into a murky pond, the cold, stagnant water seeping into your worn boots, and then feeling the unsettling sensation of small, worm-like creatures attaching themselves to your bare legs. This was the omnipresent reality of being a leech collector in an age before antibiotics and sophisticated diagnostics. Bloodletting using leeches was a common, if often ineffective, medical practice believed to cure everything from headaches to fevers. Your job was to literally harvest these alive tools of the medieval physician. You were not just a worker, you were a living lure, offering your own body or that of an unfortunate animal to the hungry creatures. It's like being a fisherman today, but your bait is your own leg, and your catch is a wriggly, blood-sucking worm. Your daily routine was a truly slimy business. You'd venture into swamps, bogs, and stagnant ponds, where leeches thrived, to attract them. You might wade into the water with your legs exposed, or use an old, sickly horse or cow as bait. The leeches would attach themselves to the warm flesh, slowly engorging with blood until they were plump and ready for collection. Imagine the uncomfortable tickle turning into a sharp bite, then a numb, sucking sensation as dozens of leeches latched onto your skin. You'd then carefully detach them, one by one, often storing them in damp moss or clay pots for transport to apothecaries or barbers. Remember the barber surgeon from the outline? Beyond the sheer unpleasantness, there was a significant disease risk. Wading in unsanitary waters exposed you to various waterborne diseases, skin infections, and the possibility of serious blood loss if too many leeches attached themselves or if the bites became infected. Imagine feeling the telltale itch of a rash breaking out on your legs, or the dull ache of an infection setting in, knowing that a simple cut or bite could quickly turn deadly in a world without modern medicine. It's enough to make you wish for a simple desk job, or perhaps just a very clean pair of waders. Despite the gross nature of the work, leech collectors played a surprisingly important role in medieval healthcare, fulfilling a constant demand from physicians and barbers who relied on these creatures for their treatments. It was a job that required both a strong constitution and a desperate need for income. This truly unpleasant role of a leech collector highlights the rudimentary and often questionable practices of medieval medicine, where a creature as humble and repulsive as the leech was considered a vital therapeutic tool, leading to specialized and very slimy occupations. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this practice is the frequent mention of leechcraft, the practice of using leeches for medical purposes in medieval medical texts and herbals. And the historical records of apothecaries' inventories often including leeches as a common stock item. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval leech collectors, particularly those who were superstitious, would reportedly carry small, intricately carved wooden charms depicting frogs or water spirits, believing these would either attract more leeches or protect them from the more aggressive. Evil varieties. Imagine having a lucky charm to help you harvest bloodsuckers. It certainly highlights the blend of practicality and superstition in their daily lives. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of leechcraft in medieval medicine primarily demonstrated a pragmatic, if limited, understanding of certain physiological responses, leading to some anecdotal successes, or if it was largely a harmful and ineffective practice that prolonged suffering and often exacerbated existing conditions due to infection and blood loss. Did it offer true healing, or just quackery regardless? Your medieval life could see you as a leech collector, engaged in a slimy business and constantly exposed to significant disease risk. So, your medieval life could see you as a leech collector, engaged in a slimy business, and constantly exposed to significant disease risk, but for a job that didn't involve blood, yet still left you perpetually drenched in a foul-smelling liquid. You might have found yourself as a fuller urine processing. Stinky textiles. Forget sweet-smelling laundries in the medieval world. The creation of strong, clean cloth often relied on one of the most unexpected and revolting ingredients imaginable. Turning a seemingly simple craft into an olfactory nightmare, imagine the pungent, acrid smell that stung your nostrils, making your eyes water and your stomach churn. This was the omnipresent reality of being a fuller. Your job was an essential step in the production of woolen cloth, transforming raw, greasy woven fabric into a denser, stronger, and more workable material. The secret ingredient, human urine, collected and fermented. You were not just a textile worker, you were a human washing machine, stomping away in vats of ammonia-rich liquid, ensuring the quality of the very clothes people wore. It's like being a laundry worker today, but your detergent is stale pee, and your washing machine is your own bare feet. Your primary task involved urine processing to clean and thicken newly woven wool cloth. The wool, fresh from the loom, was full of natural oils, lanolin, and dirt. To remove these impurities and to felt the fibers together, making the cloth denser and more durable, it was soaked in large vats containing stale urine. The ammonia in the urine acted as a powerful detergent and degreaser. Imagine stepping barefoot into a vat of warm, pungent, yellowish liquid, feeling the wet wool squish between your toes, and then spending hours, perhaps an entire day, stomping the fabric repeatedly. The ammonia fumes would be overpowering. The liquid would splash onto your face and clothes, and the smell would cling to you like a second skin. This was truly a job of stinky textiles. The entire fulling workshop would reek, and the smell would follow you home, clinging to your hair, your clothes, and probably even your dreams. Imagine trying to eat your dinner after a day of inhaling ammonia fumes. Your appetite perhaps lessened by the persistent stench that seemed to emanate from your very pores. This wasn't just a job you did, it was a job that became you, at least olfactorily. It's enough to make you wish for a simple life as a farmer, or perhaps just a very strong clothes peg for your nose. Fullers often lived and worked near rivers, both for water supply and to help flush away waste. But their immediate environment was undeniably foul, despite the unpleasantness. Fulling was a vital step in textile production, essential for creating high-quality, durable cloth that was a cornerstone of the medieval economy. This utterly revolting role of a fuller highlights the ingenious, if crude, methods employed in medieval industry, where natural resources, no matter how disgusting, were harnessed for vital manufacturing processes, creating an indelible mark on the lives of those who worked with them. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this practice is the archaeological discovery of medieval fulling mills, sometimes water-powered in vats. Along with documentary evidence from medieval guild records and town ordinances that mention fullers and the regulations surrounding their trade. Often due to the nuisance of their smell, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval fullers would reportedly try to make their urine collection more efficient by placing large ceramic pots or barrels outside public taverns and homes, essentially running a rudimentary public convenience that doubled as their raw material source. Turning human waste into an industrial input. Imagine your local pub having a designated pee collection point for the textile industry. It certainly highlights the resourcefulness and lack of squeamishness in medieval industry. Historians still argue whether the reliance on urine in medieval fulling primarily demonstrated a clever and sustainable use of readily available resources in a pre-chemical age, leading to effective cloth production, or if it was ultimately an unnecessarily unhygienic and unpleasant practice that could have been replaced by cleaner methods if more scientific knowledge had been applied. Did it show clever resourcefulness, or just a lack of better options regardless? Your medieval life could see you as a fuller, engaged in urine processing, and forever surrounded by stinky textiles. So, your medieval life could see you as a fuller, engaged in urine processing, and forever surrounded by stinky textiles. But for a different kind of terrible medieval job, one that placed you squarely in the battle against disease and destruction. You might have found yourself as a rat catcher, vermin control. Disease exposure. Forget the pungent fumes of the fulling mill. Here. The air was thick with the scent of decay, damp fur, and the ever-present threat of plague. Making every squeak a chilling reminder of your perilous profession, imagine the scuttling sound in the dark corners of a granary, the glint of tiny, beady eyes in the flickering lantern light, and the sudden lurch of a trap snapping shut. This was the omnipresent reality of being a rat catcher. In an age when rats and other vermin swarmed through medieval towns, feasting on food stores, contaminating water, and acting as vectors for terrifying diseases like the Black Death. Your job was a constant, dirty war against these unwelcome invaders. You were not just a worker, you were a frontline soldier in the battle against nature's most prolific pests. Ensuring the preservation of food and the health, however tenuous, of the populace, it's like being a modern-day exterminator. But your tools are often crude, your methods are brutal, and your personal protective equipment is basically non-existent. Your primary duty was vermin control. You'd prowl through darkened cellars. Damp sewers remember those from earlier jobs. Crowded markets and overflowing granaries. Setting traps. Laying poisons, often dangerous ones, or even using specially trained dogs or ferrets to flush out the rodents. Imagine the feeling of cold, damp stone beneath your worn boots as you crept through a reeking cellar. The stale air heavy with the smell of mold and rodent droppings. Listening intently for the telltale scratching of a rat. This wasn't a job for the faint of heart or stomach. It required patience, a tolerance for filth, and a relentless focus on your repulsive quarry, the most terrifying aspect. However, was the constant disease exposure. Rats were carriers of fleas, which in turn carried the deadly bubonic plague, as well as other maladies like typhus and leptospirosis. Every bite, every scratch, every breath of dust-laden air in an infested area was a gamble with your life. Imagine the constant worry as news of a new outbreak spread through town, knowing that your very profession put you at the highest risk, and that a single flea bite could mean a agonizing, swift death. It's enough to make you wish for a simple, outdoor job, or perhaps just a very strong anti-flea shampoo, despite the inherent dangers and the unsavory nature of the work. Rat catchers were a necessary evil in medieval society. They were often paid by the tail or by the number of carcasses, incentivizing them to be highly effective, while reviled for dealing with filth. They were grudgingly acknowledged for their vital service to public health and food security. This perilous role of a rat catcher highlights the constant battle medieval communities waged against the natural world, particularly against the unseen threats of disease carried by pervasive vermin, making it a truly terrible, yet essential, occupation. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this role is the archaeological evidence of specialized rat traps and poisons found in medieval urban contexts, and the municipal records from various European cities, which include payments to individuals for pest control services, often specifically for rats. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval rat catchers would reportedly carry a small, hollow bone, often from a bird, which they would blow into to mimic the distressed squeak of a trapped rat. Hoping to lure other curious rodents out of hiding and into their traps. Imagine your most effective tool being a bird bone that sounds like a dying mouse. It certainly highlights their resourceful, if somewhat morbid, methods. Historians still argue whether the efforts of medieval rat catchers primarily had a significant impact on reducing vermin populations and limiting disease spread, contributing to public health, or if their methods were largely insufficient against the vast numbers of rodents, making their work more symbolic than genuinely effective in mitigating epidemics. Did they truly help? Or were they just fighting a losing battle regardless? Your medieval life could see you as a rat catcher, engaged in relentless vermin control and constantly exposed to terrifying disease exposure. So, your medieval life could see you as a rat catcher, engaged in relentless vermin control and constantly exposed to terrifying disease exposure, but for a different kind of terrible medieval job, one that required an incredibly strong stomach and an almost complete lack of personal pride. You might have found yourself as a scavenger rag picker, urban filth, desperate survival. Forget the specific horrors of rats or urine. Here, your daily reality was simply the accumulated refuse of the medieval city, a constant wade through the lowest common denominator of urban life. All for the sake of a few meager coins. Imagine the ankle-deep muck in the unpaved streets, the swirling dust of dried animal waste, and the pervasive odor of decomposition hanging heavy in the air. This was the omnipresent reality of being a scavenger, specifically a rag picker or bone picker. In an age before organized waste disposal, remember the gong farmer. Dealing with the really deep stuff, much of the city's refuse simply accumulated in the streets, and it was your unenviable task to sift through it, looking for anything of value. You were not just a worker, you were a human sieve, perpetually searching for scraps in the collective waste of humanity. It's like being a dumpster diver today. But your dumpster is an entire city, and your treasures are often literally rotten. Your daily routine involved sifting through urban filth. You'd wander the narrow, crowded streets, especially after market days or public events. Equipped with a long stick or crude hook and a basket or sack, your eyes would scan the refuse for discarded rags valuable for papermaking or mending, bits of bone useful for carving or glue, pieces of metal, stray pins, or anything that could be repurposed, mended, or sold to a dealer for a pittance. Imagine the squelch of mud and discarded food beneath your worn shoes, the flies buzzing around your head, and the constant need to watch your step lest you step on something truly disgusting. This wasn't just unpleasant, it was a deeply undignified existence. This was a job born of desperate survival. The few coins or valuable scraps you managed to collect might be the only income for your entire family. Barely enough to buy a meager loaf of bread, you'd compete with other scavengers, stray dogs, and pigs for the most valuable refuse. Imagine the gnawing hunger in your stomach as you found a particularly good piece of discarded cloth. Knowing that this small find meant the difference between eating tonight or going to bed hungry, it's enough to make you wish for a simple, indoor job. Or perhaps just a very effective pair of rubber gloves and a hazmat suit. Scavengers were at the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy, often living in the direst poverty, their appearance and smell reflecting their profession. Despite being marginalized, they fulfilled an unexpected, if unofficial, role in the medieval economy, contributing to a rudimentary form of recycling long before the term existed. This truly miserable role of a scavenger highlights the extreme poverty and unsanitary conditions prevalent in medieval urban centers, where human dignity was often sacrificed in the relentless struggle for mere existence. Creating a permanent underclass? One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this role is the bylaws and regulations in medieval towns that attempted to manage street cleanliness and refuse disposal, often mentioning rakers or mud rakers who, while primarily cleaning, also engaged in collecting valuable refuse, implicitly acknowledging the scavenger's role. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval scavengers, to avoid drawing attention from city guards or other, more aggressive beggars, would reportedly develop a unique, almost imperceptible way of walking and scanning the ground. A kind of specialized scavenger's gait that allowed them to quickly spot valuable items without looking too obvious. Imagine having a specific walk just for finding trash. It certainly highlights the ingenuity born of necessity in their grim daily lives. Historians still argue whether the presence of medieval scavengers primarily demonstrated the resilience and resourcefulness of the urban poor, allowing them to carve out a niche for survival, or if it instead underscored the profound social inequality and lack of public welfare, revealing a society that simply accepted extreme destitution. Did it show adaptability, or just apathy regardless? Your medieval life could see you as a scavenger, sifting through urban filth in a constant state of desperate survival? So, your medieval life could see you as a scavenger, sifting through urban filth in a constant state of desperate survival, but for a job that didn't just involve filth, but the omnipresent specter of death itself, particularly during terrifying outbreaks. You might have found yourself as a plague doctor's assistant sickness. Dire straits. Forget the pungent smells. Here, the air was thick with the scent of illness, fear, and hopelessness, making every cough a chilling reminder of your perilous proximity to the very end of life. Imagine the eerie quiet of a quarantined house, broken only by the ragged breathing of the sick, and the grim face of the doctor peering from behind his terrifying beaked mask. This was the omnipresent reality of being a plague doctor's assistant when the Black Death or other devastating epidemics swept through medieval towns. Few dared to approach the infected, but someone had to help the official plague doctors, assisting them in their desperate, often futile, attempts to stem the tide of sickness. You were not just a worker, you were a silent, often terrified, witness to widespread suffering, living on the edge of contagion. It's like being a modern-day nurse, but your PPE is a prayer, and your medicine is often useless, and your patients are almost certainly going to die. Your duties were directly involved with the profoundly ill. You'd follow the plague doctor into infected homes, helping him examine patients, administer crude remedies, or prepare gruesome treatments like bloodletting or lancing buboes swollen. Infected lymph nodes. Imagine the hot, feverish skin beneath your touch, the desperate pleas of the dying, and the overwhelming sense of futility as another patient succumbed. Despite all efforts, you might be tasked with carrying equipment, holding patients still, or simply documenting the grim procession of the dead. This put you in truly dire straits. The risk of contagion was constant and incredibly high, while plague doctors themselves famously wore protective, if largely ineffective, gear. Assistants often had less protection, or none at all, relying on superstitious charms or sheer luck. Imagine the constant fear of feeling the first symptoms yourself: a sudden fever, a painful swelling, knowing that once the plague took hold, your fate was almost certainly sealed. This wasn't just a job, it was a daily dance with death, a gamble with your own life for meager pay and often no recognition. It's enough to make you wish for a simple, solitary life as a hermit, or perhaps just a very effective medieval vaccine. Plague doctors' assistants were often drawn from desperate individuals. Possibly former barbers, remember those from the outline for the barber surgeon. Undertakers, or even condemned criminals offered a grim choice. They were seen as essential during outbreaks. but also as touched by death and perhaps feared or avoided by the healthy population once the epidemic passed. This terrifying role of a plague doctor's assistant highlights the utter helplessness of medieval society in the face of devastating epidemics, revealing the desperate measures taken and the incredible human cost borne by those forced into the front lines of public health crises. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this role is the historical accounts from various European cities during plague outbreaks, which record official appointments and payments to plague doctors and their unnamed assistants for managing the sick and the dead, confirming their presence and function during these terrifying times. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval plague doctors' assistants, in a desperate attempt to ward off contagion, would reportedly wear small pouches filled with strong-smelling herbs like rue, mint, or even garlic around their necks, believing the pungent odors would repel the bad air miasma thought to cause the plague. Imagine your protective gear being a bag of garlic. It certainly highlights the blend of desperation and primitive understanding of disease. Historians still argue whether the efforts of plague doctors and their assistants primarily provided a crucial, albeit often symbolic, response to epidemics, maintaining some semblance of order and care, or if their interventions were largely ineffective or even harmful, with their true value lying more in recording deaths and managing the deceased than in actual medical cures. Did they offer real help, or just a grim ritual? Regardless, your medieval life could place you as a plague doctor's assistant, surrounded by sickness and in truly dire straits. So, your medieval life could place you as a plague doctor's assistant, surrounded by sickness and in truly dire straits, but for a job that didn't involve filth or disease, yet demanded a different kind of resilience, a relentless vocal cord. You might have found yourself as a town crier, public announcements, loud living, forget subtle whispers and quiet news feeds. In the medieval world, you were the walking, shouting, indispensable megaphone of the community, broadcasting vital information whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. Imagine the sudden, booming voice cutting through the market chatter, demanding attention, then the rapid-fire delivery of news and decrees. This was the omnipresent reality of being a town crier, in an era before widespread literacy, newspapers, or radio. You were the primary means of communication for local authorities and merchants, ensuring that every citizen heard the latest news, ordinances, and commercial offers. You were not just a worker, you were a living news broadcast, your voice the very conduit of public information. It's like being a social media influencer today, but your platform is your lungs, and your reach is limited to how far you can yell. Your primary duty was making public announcements. You would walk through the streets, often accompanied by a drummer or bell ringer to attract attention, stopping at key intersections or market squares. Then, after a distinctive ring of your bell or a drum roll, you'd loudly proclaim royal decrees, local bylaws, market prices, important births, deaths, or upcoming events. Imagine standing in the bustling town square, taking a deep breath, and bellowing out the latest tax edict or the arrival of a new shipment of spices, feeling your throat grow raw from the constant shouting. Regardless of whether it was raining or snowing, this wasn't just speaking, it was projecting. Day in and day out, this was truly a job of loud living. Your vocal cords were your livelihood, and you had to maintain their strength against all odds. You develop a powerful diaphragm and the ability to shout for hours without losing your voice or your mind. The constant exposure to the elements, combined with the strain on your throat, meant you were probably a frequent visitor to the local herbalist for soothing teas. Imagine waking up with a perpetually hoarse voice, or feeling a twinge in your throat after a particularly busy day of proclaiming, knowing that your job depended on your ability to shout at the top of your lungs every single day. It's enough to make you wish for a simple library job, or perhaps just a very effective medieval cough drop. Despite the comedic portrayals often seen in modern media, town criers held a respected, if noisy, position. They were official employees of the town, ensuring that all citizens, literate or not, were informed. They also served as unofficial town gossips, often privy to the latest news before anyone else. This undeniably loud role of a town crier highlights the rudimentary but effective communication systems of the medieval period, where human voice and relentless repetition were key to binding communities together and disseminating vital information. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this role is the survival of medieval municipal records, such as those from London, Paris, and various German towns that detail specific payments made to town criers for their services, and even mention regulations regarding their conduct and calls. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval town criers, especially those in larger cities, would reportedly develop unique, almost musical calls or signature phrases, like a medieval jingle, to announce their presence or differentiate themselves from other street noises, becoming known by their specific vocalizations. Imagine hearing a distinctive oh yes that signaled the start of the news. It certainly highlights their unique approach to public announcement. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of medieval town criers in disseminating information primarily stemmed from their sheer vocal power and persistence, ensuring messages reached even the most remote corners of a town, or if their impact was ultimately limited by public indifference, illiteracy, and the potential for misinterpretation in a largely oral culture. Did they truly inform, or just create noise regardless? Your medieval life could place you as a town crier, making relentless public announcements and living a truly loud living. So, your medieval life could place you as a town crier, making relentless public announcements and living a truly loud living, but for a different kind of terrible medieval job, one that assaulted the nose rather than the ears. You might have found yourself as a tanner animal hides. Pungent production. Forget the shouts of news here. The dominant sensory experience was a gut-wrenching stench. And your hands, rather than holding a bell, were perpetually steeped in noxious, rotting fluids, all for the sake of durable leather. Imagine the cloying, putrid smell of rotting animal flesh and stagnant water. A smell so pervasive it seemed to stick to your very soul. This was the omnipresent reality of being a tanner. Your job was to transform raw animal hides into usable leather, a process essential for making everything from shoes and belts to armor and bookbindings. However, the methods employed were incredibly messy, protracted, and designed to break down organic matter in the most foul-smelling ways possible. You were not just a craftsman, you were a master of decomposition, expertly guiding the decay of animal skin to create something valuable. It's like being a modern-day chemist, but your laboratory is a series of open pits, and your main reagent is animal excrement. Your work began with raw animal hides, often fresh from the slaughterhouse. The first step was usually to soak the hides in a lime solution to remove hair and flesh remnants, a process that created a truly awful alkaline smell. Then came the most infamous part, soaking the hides in vats of fermented animal dung and urine, or even dog feces known as pur, from the Latin for boy, likely because it was collected by boys, or perhaps due to its softening properties. For weeks or months, the enzymes in these delightful concoctions would help break down the hide's proteins, making it pliable. Imagine the slippery, slimy feel of a half-rotten hide in your hands, the thick, murky liquid splashing onto your face, and the overwhelming gag-inducing odor of putrefaction assaulting your senses, making every breath a challenge. This was truly a job of pungent production. Tanneries were typically located on the outskirts of towns, often downwind and near a water source, precisely because their stench was so offensive that no one wanted them nearby. The smell was not merely a byproduct, it was an integral part of the process, clinging to the tanner's clothes, hair, and skin, making them easily identifiable by scent alone. Imagine trying to enjoy a meal after a day of inhaling such fumes, your appetite probably non-existent, and knowing that this inescapable odor defined your very existence. It's enough to make you wish for a simple life as a fishmonger, or perhaps just a very strong medieval air freshener. Despite the utterly repulsive nature of the work, tanners played a crucial economic role, providing a versatile and durable material vital for numerous aspects of medieval life. The demand for leather was constant, ensuring steady, if utterly disgusting, employment. This incredibly foul role of a tanner highlights the reliance of medieval industries on rudimentary, often biological, processes that generated immense pollution and made the lives of the workers profoundly unpleasant. Even as they produced essential goods, one mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this trade is the archaeological discovery of medieval tannery pits filled with lime and organic residues, and the numerous guild regulations and urban ordinances that document the trade of tanners, often stipulating where their workshops could be located due to the overwhelming stench. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval tanners, perhaps as a morbid form of dark humor, would reportedly use small, uniquely carved wooden masks or nose plugs adorned with grotesque faces, not for protection, but as a symbolic gesture of defiance against the overwhelming stench they endured daily. Almost like a secret badge of courage for facing the foulest odors. Imagine your professional attire, including a grimacing nose mask. It certainly highlights the resilience and dark humor needed to survive such a job. Historians still argue whether the medieval tanning process, despite its stench and reliance on putrefaction, primarily represented an efficient and necessary industrial process for the production of durable goods in a pre-chemical era, or if it was an environmentally destructive and humanly degrading industry that could have been improved with more sophisticated techniques. Even within the confines of medieval knowledge, did it show ingenious practicality? Or just primitive brutality regardless? Your medieval life could place you as a tanner, working with raw animal hides and enduring truly pungent production. So, your medieval life could place you as a tanner, working with raw animal hides and enduring truly pungent production, but for a job that dealt not with animal remains, but the far more chilling remnants of humanity. You might have found yourself as a bone grubber, Graves. Gruesome harvest. Forget the reek of the tannery? Here. The air was cold with the stillness of the cemetery. And your hands, rather than shaping leather, were delving into disturbed earth, extracting the very bones of the long dead. Imagine the quiet chill of the churchyard, the disturbing crunch of disturbed soil beneath your shovel, and the unsettling sight of a human skull emerging from the earth. This was the grim reality of being a bone grubber, also known as a bone picker or grave cleaner, in overcrowded medieval towns. Burial space was often at a premium, especially within churchyards, when new graves needed to be dug. Older ones had to be cleared, and it was your macabre task to excavate the decomposing remains and consolidate the bones. You were not just a laborer, you were a custodian of the dead, albeit one who treated their remnants as a raw material to be managed. It's like being an archaeologist today, but your goal isn't scientific discovery, it's clearing space, and your artifacts are simply discarded human skeletons. Your work directly involved graves, often shallow and perpetually damp. When a new burial was required in an already full churchyard, you would reopen older graves, disturbing the layers of soil and human remains. Your tools would be a shovel, a pickaxe, and often your bare hands. As you carefully or perhaps not so carefully separated bones from the decaying shrouds and earth. Imagine the chill that would creep up your spine as you lifted a femur or a rib cage. The remnants of a person who once lived, loved, and breathed, now reduced to skeletal fragments in your grasp. This was a daily encounter with death in its most raw, unromanticized form. This was a truly gruesome harvest. The collected bones would often be taken to an ossuary, a charnel house or bone house, where they would be neatly stacked, sometimes categorized by type skulls in one pile, long bones in another. These ossuaries were a common feature in overcrowded European cemeteries, a practical solution to limited space, Imagine hauling cartloads of human bones, feeling their weight, and then meticulously arranging them in a wall or pile, turning countless individual lives into an anonymous, macabre monument. It's enough to make you wish for a simple life as a shepherd, or perhaps just a very strong sense of professional detachment. Despite the inherent gruesomeness and the social stigma associated with disturbing the dead, bone grubbers performed a necessary, albeit unpleasant, public service. They ensured that new burials could take place and that the deceased had some form of resting place, even if it was a communal bone pile. This disturbing role of a bone grubber highlights the practical challenges of urban burial in the medieval period and the grim necessities that led to occupations dealing directly with human decomposition and the remanagement of the dead. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this practice is the widespread existence of charnel houses and ossuaries across medieval Europe, many still visible today, such as the Sedlec ossuary or the Capuchin crypts, which demonstrate the systematic collection and arrangement of human bones due to overcrowded cemeteries. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval bone grubbers, perhaps to ward off evil spirits or just as a dark form of gallows humor, would reportedly attach small, discarded trinkets or broken rosary beads to some of the skulls they stacked, giving a fleeting, macabre individuality back to the anonymous dead. Imagine finding a tiny, forgotten charm tied to a skull. It certainly highlights the peculiar human tendency to find meaning, even in the most grim of circumstances. Historians still argue whether the practice of bone grubbing primarily demonstrated a pragmatic and necessary solution to limited burial space, allowing for the spiritual comfort of new burials, or if it instead represented a morbid and disrespectful treatment of human remains, reflecting a societal desensitization to death during a period of high mortality. Did it show practicality, or just a lack of reverence regardless? Your medieval life could see you as a bone grubber, toiling in graves and engaged in a truly gruesome harvest. So, your medieval life could see you as a bone grubber, toiling in graves and engaged in a truly gruesome harvest, but for a job that combined the mundane with the horrifying, the mundane being haircutting and the horrifying being bloodletting. You might have found yourself as a barber surgeon bloodletting. Painful procedures? Forget sharp scissors and soothing shaves. Here, the tools of your trade often included lancets and crude saws, and your clients arrived with everything from a bad beard to a broken bone, often leaving in more pain than they arrived. Imagine the metallic tang of blood in the air, the guttural cries of a patient, and the chilling glint of a well-used blade. This was the omnipresent reality of being a barber surgeon in medieval times. The lines between medicine, surgery, and basic grooming were blurred. Barbers, already skilled with sharp instruments, naturally evolved into performing minor surgical procedures, tooth extractions, and, most famously, bloodletting. You were not just a barber, you were a frontline medical practitioner, often the first and only resort for the common folk, whose pain you were meant to alleviate, or at least manage. It's like being a modern-day general practitioner, but your office is also a hair salon, and your qualifications involve a steady hand and a tolerance for gore. One of your most common tasks was bloodletting, based on ancient humoral theory. It was believed that illnesses were caused by an imbalance of the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. To restore balance, excess blood was removed, often by opening a vein with a lancet. Imagine carefully nicking a vein in a patient's arm, watching the dark blood flow into a basin, and hoping that this crude procedure, which was just as likely to cause infection as cure anything, would alleviate their symptoms. The famous red and white striped barber pole actually symbolizes this: the red for blood, the white for bandages. Beyond bloodletting, you performed a range of other painful procedures. This included tooth extractions, often without any anesthetic. Remember the lack of pain management, setting simple fractures, lancing boils and abscesses, and even rudimentary amputations in extreme cases. Imagine the desperate grip of a patient on your arm as you pulled a rotten tooth with a pair of crude pliers, or the bone-chilling sound of a saw against bone during an amputation. Knowing that their only anesthesia might be a swig of ale or a prayer, it's enough to make you wish for a simple haircutting business. Or perhaps just a very strong medieval painkiller. Barber surgeons were often itinerant, traveling from town to town, or establishing shops in urban centers. They were generally considered below academically trained physicians, but far more accessible to the common person due to their lower fees and willingness to perform manual, often bloody, interventions. This incredibly gruesome role of a barber surgeon highlights the primitive state of medieval medicine, where practitioners often relied on inherited traditions and trial and error, performing brutal procedures out of a desperate attempt to heal, often with more pain than progress. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this role is the survival of medieval medical texts that detail bloodletting points and surgical techniques, as well as guild records that show the gradual separation and eventual professionalization of barbers and surgeons, indicating their shared historical origins. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval barber surgeons, to dispose of the blood from their daily bloodlettings, would reportedly have a small, almost hidden drain or hole near their operating chair that led directly into the street gutter below, ensuring a quick and somewhat discreet disposal of bodily fluids, but contributing to the general unsanitary conditions. Imagine having a designated blood drain in your shop. It certainly highlights the practical, if unsanitary, solutions to medical waste. Historians still argue whether the widespread practice of bloodletting by barber surgeons primarily offered a legitimate, albeit limited, therapeutic benefit for certain conditions, adhering to the best medical theories of the time, or if it was largely an ineffective and often harmful intervention that weakened patients and spread infection. Showcasing the limitations and dangers of medieval medical knowledge, did it provide relief, or just cause more harm regardless? Your medieval life could place you as a barber surgeon, performing countless bloodlettings and enduring numerous painful procedures. So, your medieval life could place you as a barber surgeon, performing countless bloodlettings and enduring numerous painful procedures, but for a job that combined filth with extreme physical danger in the most constricted of spaces. You might have found yourself as a chimney sweep soot. Suffocating spaces. Forget the relative openness of a surgical theater. Here, your world was claustrophobic, dark, and perpetually choked with thick, black soot, making every breath a struggle and every climb a gamble with your life. Imagine the tight squeeze of a narrow flue, the gritty feel of soot against your skin, and the choking sensation as fine black dust filled your lungs. This was the omnipresent reality of being a chimney sweep, in an age when fireplaces were the primary source of heat and cooking. Chimneys accumulated vast amounts of highly flammable creosote and soot. Requiring regular cleaning to prevent dangerous fires, your job was to climb into these dark, confined spaces, often relying on your small size and agility. You were not just a worker, you were a living brush. Navigating the perilous architecture of the home's ventilation system, it's like being a modern-day contortionist. But your stage is a soot-filled tunnel, and your performance is constantly at risk of spontaneous combustion. Your daily routine was dominated by soot. You'd carry your brushes and scrapers, often wearing little more than rags, and then ascend into the dark, vertical shafts of chimneys. The soot would fall like black snow, coating your entire body, getting into your eyes, nose, and mouth. Imagine the sensation of constantly wiping black grime from your face, feeling the grit between your teeth, and knowing that every inhale brought more fine particles into your lungs, guaranteeing a persistent cough and long-term respiratory problems. The smell of burnt wood and stale soot would cling to you, a constant companion. Beyond the filth, you faced truly suffocating spaces. Medieval chimneys were often narrow and winding, with tight turns and dangerous protrusions. Children were frequently employed for this job due to their smaller stature. allowing them to access flues too small for adults. Imagine shimmying up a dark, vertical shaft, feeling the claustrophobia pressing in on you, the air growing thick and hot, and the constant fear of getting stuck, or of loose bricks falling from above. Fatal accidents, such as falls, asphyxiation from soot, or becoming trapped, were tragically common. It's enough to make you wish for a simple ground-level job, or perhaps just a very wide-open prairie. Chimney sweeps were often apprentices, sometimes orphans or exploited children sold into service. Despite the dangers and the low social standing associated with their dirty work, they provided an essential fire prevention service, protecting homes and lives. This incredibly dangerous role of a chimney sweep highlights the inherent risks of medieval domestic life and the desperate exploitation of child labor for tasks deemed too unpleasant or hazardous for adults, creating a tragically short and brutal working life for many. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this trade is the proliferation of medieval and early modern building codes that mandated chimney cleaning for fire safety. And later, the historical records of charities and workhouses that apprenticed poor children to chimney sweep masters. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval chimney sweep masters, to encourage or coerce smaller children into particularly tight or daunting flues, would reportedly light a small, quick fire at the bottom of the chimney after the child had entered, creating a sudden burst of heat and smoke that would compel the child to climb faster towards the top. A truly horrific form of motivation. Imagine your boss setting a fire under you? Literally. It certainly highlights the extreme and cruel methods used to force child labor. Historians still argue whether the reliance on child chimney sweeps primarily demonstrated the practical necessity of maintaining fire safety in medieval homes, given the architectural constraints of the time, or if it was an indefensible practice that systematically abused children, leading to widespread illness and premature death for the sake of cheap labor. Did it keep homes safe, or just destroy lives regardless? Your medieval life could place you as a chimney sweep, perpetually covered in soot, and navigating terrifyingly suffocating spaces. So, your medieval life could place you as a chimney sweep, perpetually covered in soot, and navigating terrifyingly suffocating spaces? But for a job that involved neither filth nor confined spaces, yet epitomized a different kind of medieval brutality, you might have found yourself as a bear-baiter animal cruelty. Dangerous sport. Forget the claustrophobia of a chimney. Here, the air was thick with the growls of chained animals, the shouts of the crowd, and the chilling reality of bloodsport, making every roar a testament to sanctioned cruelty. Imagine the deafening roar of the crowd, the frantic barking of dogs, and the terrifying, guttural snarl of a chained bear. This was the omnipresent reality of being a bear baiter, or an assistant to one, in medieval towns and cities across Europe. Bear baiting was a popular, often government-sanctioned, spectator sport where a chained bear was attacked by a pack of specially trained dogs. Your job involved managing the animals, setting up the arena, and ensuring the continuation of this brutal spectacle. You were not just a worker, you were a facilitator of cruelty, an integral part of a violent pastime that provided entertainment at the expense of immense animal suffering. It's like being a zookeeper today, but your main goal is to make sure the animals tear each other apart for public amusement. Your duties were directly involved in animal cruelty. You would be responsible for handling the powerful, often injured, bears, leading them to the stake where they would be chained. You'd also manage the pack of aggressive dogs, encouraging them to attack and separating them when necessary. Imagine the sharp bite of a dog's leash in your hand, the powerful lurch of a bear straining against its chain, and the constant threat of being mauled by either animal if you made a mistake. This wasn't just observing cruelty, you were an active participant, desensitized to the suffering by the regularity of the gruesome events. This was a truly dangerous sport for both the animals and the human handlers. The bears, often captured from the wild, were powerful and unpredictable, and the dogs were bred for aggression, injuries to the handlers, from bites and scratches to more severe maulings, were a constant risk. Imagine the adrenaline pumping through your veins as a bear lunged unexpectedly, its massive claws missing you by inches, or the pain of a dog bite as you tried to pull it off the bear. Knowing that a serious injury could mean the end of your livelihood, or even your life. In a world with limited medical care, remember the barber surgeon. It's enough to make you wish for a simple, quiet life as a shepherd, or perhaps just a very strong medieval tranquilizer gun. Bear baiters were often associated with other forms of animal handling or entertainment, like bear dancing, and were a common sight at fairs and festivals. Despite the barbarity of the sport by modern standards, it was a legitimate and popular form of entertainment that drew large crowds, including royalty and nobility. This undeniably cruel role of a bear baiter highlights the stark differences in societal attitudes towards animal welfare in the medieval period, where brutal spectacles were a common form of public amusement and a grim livelihood for those involved in organizing them. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this practice is the historical records from medieval European towns and royal courts that document payments for bear-baiting spectacles. Mentions of bear-wards, bear handlers, and even the existence of specific bear gardens or arenas designed for these events. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval bear baiters, to make the bears more aggressive or to prolong the spectacle, would reportedly give the bears small, crude stimulants, like a mixture of strong ale and raw meat, before a baiting session, essentially trying to get them drunk and angry for the show. Imagine trying to get a bear drunk before its performance. It certainly highlights the lengths to which they went to ensure an exciting show. Regardless of the animal's welfare, historians still argue whether the popularity of bear baiting primarily reflected a robust, if brutal, culture of public entertainment and a pragmatic use of wild animals, or if it instead represented a systemic normalization of animal cruelty and violence, reflecting a darker, less compassionate aspect of medieval society. Did it show a lively culture, or just a cruel one regardless? Your medieval life could place you as a bear baiter, engaged in shocking animal cruelty for a dangerous sport. So, your medieval life could place you as a bear baiter, engaged in shocking animal cruelty for a dangerous sport, but for a job that dealt with an unending stream of human loss, demanding constant physical labor and a somber detachment. You might have found yourself as a grave digger, constant death, somber toil. Forget the roars of the crowd. Here, the sounds were the soft thud of earth, the whisper of prayers, and the chilling finality of the freshly turned soil, making every funeral a familiar yet exhausting routine. Imagine the damp, heavy earth clinging to your shovel, the chill seeping into your bones as you stand knee-deep in a freshly dug pit, and the quiet procession of mourners gathered at the edge. This was the omnipresent reality of being a grave digger. In an age with high mortality rates, frequent epidemics remember plague doctors' assistants and limited medical knowledge. Death was a constant companion, and someone always had to prepare the final resting places. Your job was not just to dig a hole, it was to facilitate the grieving process, to provide the physical space for sorrow and farewells. You were not just a worker, you were a gatekeeper to the afterlife. A silent, essential part of every community's cycle of life and death. It's like being a landscaper today, but your clients are all deceased, and your gardening involves a lot of very deep holes. Your work was defined by constant death, whether for a lord or a pauper, a child or an elder. The demand for graves was unceasing. You'd spend your days digging, often by hand, in all weather conditions, summer heat, winter frost, pouring rain. Medieval cemeteries, particularly in towns, were often overcrowded. Remember bone grubbers, clearing out old graves, making the digging process even more challenging. As you might frequently encounter previous burials, Imagine the methodical rhythm of your shovel hitting the earth, feeling the strain in your back and arms, and the repetitive nature of excavating another 6 foot deep hole, knowing that by tomorrow, or next week, you'd be digging another. This was a job of pervasive, somber toil. While you might grow desensitized to the grimness, the presence of grieving families, the solemnity of funeral rites, and the sheer volume of deceased individuals meant your work was always tinged with a sense of gravity. Imagine standing respectfully at the edge of a fresh grave, waiting for the coffin to be lowered, feeling the quiet sadness of the moment. Even if you perform the same task countless times that week, it's enough to make you wish for a simple job as a woodcutter, or perhaps just a very warm and dry place to rest after a long day. Despite the morbid nature of their profession, grave diggers were essential to medieval society. They often worked for the church or the local community, ensuring that the dead were properly interred according to religious customs. They were often paid per grave, incentivizing efficiency. This indispensable role of a grave digger highlights the ever-present reality of death in medieval life and the practical, often physical, labor required to process and accommodate the constant losses faced by every community, making it a truly tough yet necessary occupation. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this role is the archaeological evidence of medieval cemeteries with multiple layers of burials, indicating continuous use and the need for regular grave digging and reuse of space. Along with church records detailing burials and sometimes payments to grave diggers, a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval grave diggers, perhaps to mark their specific graves or to add a touch of morbid artistry, would reportedly carve small, crude symbols or initials into the wooden crosses or markers of the graves they dug. A tiny, almost secret signature of their constant toil in the earth. Imagine seeing a tiny, almost hidden carving on a tombstone marking the work of the long-forgotten gravedigger. It certainly highlights the human desire to leave a mark, even in the most somber of professions. Historians still argue whether the constant exposure of medieval gravediggers to death primarily fostered a unique resilience and acceptance of mortality, making them wise observers of human fragility, or if it instead led to a profound psychological desensitization and potential for callousness, hardening them to the suffering of others. Did it make them stoic, or just numb? Regardless, your medieval life could place you as a grave digger, engaged in constant death and profound somber toil. So, your medieval life could place you as a grave digger, engaged in constant death and profound somber toil. But for the absolute worst of the worst, the job that literally put you at the bottom of medieval society, wading through the very essence of human waste and forgotten debris, you might have found yourself as a sewer cleaner filth. Forgotten depths. Forget the open air of the cemetery. Here, your world was subterranean, perpetually dark, suffocatingly foul, and utterly abhorrent, making every inch a battle against unimaginable putrefaction. Imagine the absolute darkness pressing in around you, broken only by the feeble flicker of your lantern, the squelch of viscous, fetid sludge beneath your bare feet, and the overwhelming, eye-watering stench of centuries of accumulated waste. This was the ultimate, inescapable reality of being a sewer cleaner. While rudimentary sewers existed in some larger medieval towns and castles, they were nothing like modern systems. They were often open channels or crude, dark tunnels designed to carry away stormwater and some household waste. When these became clogged, often with solid refuse and excrement, someone had to go in and clear them by hand. You were not just a worker, you were a human shovel, a living conduit for the most vile effluvia of the medieval urban landscape. It's like being a modern-day sanitation worker, but your truck is a bucket. Your uniform is your own skin, and your workplace is literally an underground river of pure disgust. Your daily routine was defined by unimaginable filth. You would descend into these dark, confined tunnels, often crawling or wading through stagnant, disease-ridden water and solid human and animal waste. Your tools would be simple: a shovel, a rake, and a bucket used to break up blockages and scoop out the heavy, putrid sludge. Imagine the feeling of the cold, slimy muck clinging to your legs, the sickening realization of what you were touching, and the constant threat of disease from the raw sewage. The air would be thick with methane and other noxious gases, making breathing difficult and dangerous. This wasn't just dirty, it was an assault on every single one of your senses. A profound degradation of the human experience. These were truly the forgotten depths of medieval society, both literally and figuratively. Sewer cleaners worked in obscurity, their existence barely acknowledged. Their contributions vital yet utterly unappreciated. They faced extreme health risks from infections, respiratory illnesses from the gases, and the ever-present danger of drowning in flash floods or becoming trapped in collapsing tunnels. Imagine the profound isolation of working alone in the darkness. The sounds of the city muffled above you, knowing that if something went wrong, no one would likely hear your cries, and your fate would be sealed in that putrid underground world. It's enough to make you wish for a simple, dry, above-ground job, or perhaps just a very strong medieval gas mask. Sewer cleaners, like gong farmers, remember them from Section 1, were at the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy, often the most desperate members of society. Their work was essential for preventing widespread disease and maintaining some level of urban hygiene, but it came at an incredibly high personal cost, often leading to short, miserable lives. This horrifying role of a sewer cleaner highlights the extreme conditions endured by the lowest-ranked laborers in medieval society, revealing the brutal realities of urban infrastructure maintenance when faced with pervasive waste and rudimentary technology, pushing human endurance to its absolute limits. One mainstream historical fact that powerfully illustrates this role is the archaeological discovery of medieval sewer systems beneath some major European cities like London or Paris, and the scarce, but existing, municipal records that occasionally mention the upkeep of these systems and the hiring of laborers for their maintenance. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some medieval sewer cleaners, when encountering particularly stubborn blockages, would reportedly use long, flexible poles tipped with crude barbed hooks, designed to snag and pull out large clumps of compacted waste, almost like an ancient, gruesome version of drain snaking. Imagine using a giant fishing hook for human waste. It certainly highlights the crude ingenuity required for such a vile job. Historians still argue whether the efforts of medieval sewer cleaners primarily provided a crucial, albeit hidden, public health service, preventing even worse epidemics by managing urban waste, or if their work was ultimately a futile attempt against overwhelming unsanitary conditions, causing more suffering for the workers than actual benefit to the wider populace. Did they truly help? Or were they simply sacrificed regardless? Your medieval life could place you as a sewer cleaner, submerged in unimaginable filth within society's forgotten depths. Now, let the stench of the sewers fade from your nostrils. The echoing shouts of the town crier quiet, and the grim images of grave digging recede into silence. The slime of the leach pit washes away, the grime of the chimney soot disappears, and the fear of the bear pit melts into a blurring memory. There's no more need to stoop in a cesspit, no more worrying about a plague outbreak, and no more struggle just to make it through another day in the muck. Just the soft hum of your fan, the gentle warmth of your blanket, and the profound quiet of your room. You can release the imagined burdens of those incredibly tough, yet remarkably vital medieval jobs, the constant dirt, the pervasive smells, and the surprisingly grim realities of a world so profoundly different from our own. That grim, fascinating, yet undeniably harsh ancient world of medieval laborers belongs to history, not to your peaceful present. Drift now into a deep, untroubled rest. Sweet dreams. And a script? Sweet dreams.